Ms. Indranee.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the members for their questions and comments from the Ministry of Finance. Members' cuts cover 4 broad topics. First, accountability and governance in our expenditure. Second, goods and services tax and other revenue sources. Third, support for businesses to overcome COVID-19 disruptions. And last, how we will position our business ecosystem for the future. I will address these topics in turn. Mr. Leong Eng Hwa and Ms. Foo Mee Ha asked how we strengthen accountability and governance for our spending. We've established governance and monitoring structures to ensure proper accountability for the use of public resources and strengthen performance for programs. The independent, regular, and thorough audits by the Auditor General's Office are reported publicly and complemented by Ministry's internal audits, as well as their program evaluation efforts to ensure that spending translates into good outcomes. Ministries are also putting in place enterprise risk management frameworks, which will be reviewed at regular intervals by MOF. Dedicated function offices have also been set up in MOF to strengthen whole-of-government processes and capabilities in finance, procurement, and grant management. These offices also coordinate across agencies to achieve greater efficiencies and savings in respective functions. Members of the public have also provided feedback directly to government agencies on how we can obtain better value from public expenditure. Key government priorities are monitored regularly and reported in the annual budget book and the biennial Singapore Public Sector Outcomes Review or SPOR report. The SPOR report was revamped in 2020 to go fully digital and improve accessibility for readers. The content is presented in a more citizen and business-centric manner with greater emphasis on outcomes. It highlights the impact on citizens and businesses, such as the fact that one can now start a business within 1.5 days. 2 weeks ago, we published an updated assessment on the impact of key COVID-19 measures, such as the Job Support Scheme, JSS, and the SG United Jobs and Skills Package. The findings show how the Singapore economy has largely avoided medium-term scarring from COVID-19 and is poised to continue its recovery. Ms. Foo Mee Ha asked about the controls and governance for COVID-related schemes. Indeed, as we rolled out COVID-19 schemes quickly, we struck a balance between keeping processes simple and putting in place controls to prevent abuse or errors. For the JSS, a risk assessment is done, and for cases with higher fraud risks, the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore, IRAS, requires firms to authenticate their CPF contributions before releasing payouts. IRAS has denied payments to employers who attempt to abuse the scheme and referred cases to the police for investigation. As of last week, 14 cases have been referred to the police. Despite these efforts, given the unprecedented complexity and the need for urgent disbursement across the board through JSS, there were some mistakes which are deeply regretted. When such an instance was discovered, we took immediate efforts to rectify them. Out of the 370 million JSS overpayment discovered earlier, we have recovered over 99% and are working on recovering the rest. Ms. Foo Mee Ha, Mr. Sean Huang, and Mr. Edward Chia asked how we ensure value for money in major infrastructure projects. Before the government embarks on a project, MOF reviews the project objectives and business case. For example, at the initial stage, we examine the cost-benefit analysis and consider synergies across projects or other opportunities to optimize resources. As the plans develop, MOF works with the development agencies to determine the development approach, design and risk, and use evaluation tools such as life cycle costing to optimize costs across the infrastructure lifespan. Mr. Edward Chia suggested that we consider buying certain infrastructure or systems as a service. Indeed, we are open to such options, which is why life cycle costing is an important tool to assess different options holistically. For the evaluation of larger and more complex projects, we have benefited from the advice of the Development Projects Advisory Panel, which comprises technical experts from the private sector and academia. Of the projects submitted for approval last year, MOF managed to achieve cost savings of about 800 million or 4% of a capital cost of 14.4 billion. But as I have said, we don't just focus on reducing upfront construction costs. By working with agencies on design optimization and system choices, we seek to reduce total life cycle costs, which include downstream operating costs. As an example, for the Cross Island Line, the Land Transport Authority is using a different traction power supply system that enables more efficient power transmission. This reduces total energy usage and the number of substations required. This is expected to result in life cycle cost savings of about $280 million. MOF also works with development agencies to maintain strong accountability and controls for the management of major infrastructure projects. For instance, to better manage infrastructure project risks, we are consolidating the management of such projects under agencies with stronger expertise. JTC, with its deep experience in construction, has helped 28 agencies manage 50 construction projects worth 9 billion. Mr. Cheryl Terra's asked how much revenue the 2% point increase in GST would raise and how much goes towards the offset packages. At a GST rate of 9%, we expect to collect an additional 0.7% of GDP per year, currently estimated to be about 3.5 billion. This is less than the projected increase in healthcare spending, which could amount to over 1 percentage point of GDP by 2030. At the same time, the enhanced permanent GST voucher scheme will cost about 500 million more per year in FY 2023 compared to today. There is a clear social purpose in this way of doing things. The additional 3.5 billion is collected from all, including the rich, foreigners and tourists. The GST voucher scheme benefits the lower to middle income Singaporean household, including most retiree households. This is one of the ways we make our system of taxes and transfers a fair and progressive one. Members would remember the chart shown by the Minister for Finance. When we take into account the GSTV and the GST absorbed by government, we indeed have tiered GST rates. But we achieve this not by exempting certain goods or services for all customers, but by our uniquely Singaporean way of implementing GST with GSTV. Ms. Yo Wan Ling asked how we can help private hire car drivers pass on the cost of GST to their commuters. The taxi operators and private hire car platform owners decide on fares. They may choose to raise fares from time to time to cover the increase in operating costs, and all taxi operators have recently done so. The 60% fixed expense deduction ratio is set at a level to cover most of the common deductible expenses incurred by drivers in earning their income. In setting the FEDR, we need to strike a balance between simplifying tax compliance and ensuring that it is realistic. The current 60% ratio remains sufficient for the vast majority of drivers. For those whose actual deductible expenses exceed the 60% ratio, they continue to have the option to file their tax returns based on the actual expenses incurred. We will continue to monitor the situation. Let me now address questions from Mr. Liang Eng Hua, Mr. Edward Chia, and Mr. Satyandi Supat on how the government can continue to support companies impacted by the pandemic and provide timely and targeted support. The pandemic continues to disrupt global supply chains and business activities. Ports and airports around the world today remain affected by pandemic-related restrictions and manpower constraints, resulting in delays and higher transport costs for our businesses. We're aware of the pressures on our businesses and the challenges they face. The government has therefore continued to provide support to alleviate the impact of the pandemic and made adjustments with changing circumstances. We will continue to monitor the situation going into 2022 and adjust our measures as necessary. For example, The JSS was first designed as a broad-based wage support scheme to help employers retain their local employees when we first began our fight against COVID-19 in 2020. Payouts were tiered to broadly reflect the different levels of impact on different sectors. As we went into 2021, some sectors recovered ahead of others. Some of our safe management measures had a greater impact on certain sectors, such as construction, F&B, retail, gyms, and fitness studios. So we targeted the JSS to help the sectors most impacted by COVID-19 measures. Similarly, we acted fast to change the disbursement mode of rental relief from requiring landlords to grant rental waivers to giving direct payouts to tenants under the Rental Support Scheme, or the RSS. Beyond providing targeted support, we've invested efforts to enhance the JSS and RSS disbursement process to make timely payments to employers and eligible tenants and owners. We have disbursed more than 28 billion of JSS to about 180,000 employers expeditiously, with the most recent tranche being disbursed within 2 months from the announcement of the extended support for businesses most adversely affected by COVID-19 restrictions. This was possible as 90% of these businesses were registered under Pay Now Corporate or had existing GIRO arrangements with IRAS. IRAS combined the data it had across various tax types to auto-disburse the RSS payouts directly to more than 80% of eligible tenants and owner-occupants. More than 110,000 payouts worth almost 1 billion were disbursed automatically within 2 months from the announcement of the scheme. This was the first time the government gave direct disbursements to tenants, and we received positive feedback that the disbursements were fast and effortless. We will continue to invest in capabilities for business grant disbursements so that our assistance can reach businesses promptly. As Mr. Liang Eng Hua and Mr. Edward Chia observed, our businesses appreciate prompt payment. MOF has worked on providing faster payments to our suppliers. To ease our supplier cash flows, we pay our vendors faster by streamlining the procure-to-pay process from procurement to goods receipt and payment. As at end January 2022, about 97% of invoices below $5,000 were paid within 12 days ahead of the usual credit term of 30 days. This benefited nearly 9,000 suppliers, mostly SMEs. To further ease supplier cash flows, we were working with MTI to allow auto-approval for factoring of certain government contracts later this year so that our suppliers can have more financing options. We're also aware of the challenges faced by government construction contractors. The pandemic continues to impact the productivity on site, supply chain, and manpower availability, leading to delays and cost increases. The government has taken a proactive stance to shoulder part of the cost increases. This aims to soften the impact of productivity loss from requirements such as safe management measures on site and shortage of foreign manpower due to border controls. When the pandemic first broke out in 2020, we made advance payments worth 665 million for over 450 public sector construction contracts to help contractors tide over work stoppages. We also provided support of more than 230 million by co-sharing costs. These include the cost of prolongation, increased manpower costs, and consultancy services. These measures, including support for manpower costs through JSS and foreign work levy waivers and rebates, have helped our construction suppliers through the crisis. On Mr. Chia's suggestion to assess main contractors' payment promptness to subcontractors in our tender evaluation, it's not easy for a service buyer to verify or monitor the private business practices of its contractors. In general, if a contractor does not treat its subcontractor well, we expect few subcontractors would be keen to work with it. Where such market forces have not worked so well, the Building and Construction Industry Security of Payment Act provides legal recourse for subcontractors affected by late or no payment. Ms. Fu asked whether a select group of companies enjoyed outsized windfalls from the COVID-19 support schemes and how these companies can contribute back for the common good. The initial impetus for schemes like the JSS was to provide timely cash flow support to businesses to protect our local workers. We then adjusted our approach to exclude those sectors such as supermarkets, which were doing very well, but to finally target by the fortunes of individual businesses would not be possible. When businesses flourish or do exceptionally well, they pay more corporate income tax. Their workers who receive bonuses also pay taxes, including GST. Such additional revenue can then be channeled to fund government programs. Some businesses have also taken the initiative to contribute to the community in various ways through their corporate social responsibility activities, which is commendable. For example, DFI Retail Group ramped up efforts to donate food and healthcare essentials to the needy through a food donation drive through the group's grocery stores, Cold Storage and Giant, while FairPrice pledged in January 2022 to donate 1.2 million to 600 families over 3 years to help low-income families cope with higher costs of living. Moving from businesses to families, let me address Ms. Mariam Jaffar's question of how we reach out to vulnerable individuals and families without their own homes when many support measures are tied to the household or housing type. Government assistance is prioritized for families with less means and in greater need of social support. In means testing for our social schemes, housing type is one of the proxies we use to estimate an individual's means. We also look at other factors such as income and number of members in the household. A person living in a higher value property or larger housing type is, in general, more likely to have access to resources or support through family. Where there are exceptional circumstances, I encourage our MPs and community leaders to bring these cases to the attention of the relevant agencies so that their circumstances can be holistically assessed. And I would like to assure Ms. Jaffar that we will do our best to extend help to the vulnerable and needy who lack other forms of support. Let me now address questions from Mr. Liang, Ms. Jessica Tan, and Mr. Sean Huang on how MOF is strengthening the business ecosystem to position it for future shifts. I will elaborate on how we are stepping up our efforts in 2 areas. First, we will strengthen Singapore as a trusted, open, and effective business hub. We will continue to enhance our corporate governance regime to combat money laundering and terrorism financing and other threats to the integrity of the international financial system. This includes aligning ourselves with international standards, such as those under the Intergovernmental Financial Action Task Force. For example, in January this year, Parliament passed the Corporate Register's Miscellaneous Amendments Bill to strengthen Singapore's regime on the transparency and beneficial ownership of companies and limited liability partnerships. ACRA is pivoting towards more risk-targeted supervision for the registered filing agent sector by using data analytics to identify high-risk agents. It is also studying proposals to further enhance our anti-money laundering regime. We will consult the public on these proposals later in the year. Apart from our work to combat money laundering, we are also strengthening Singapore's position as a global intellectual property or IP hub, as well as a fund management hub, by ensuring that the regulatory framework keeps pace with business needs. Second, we will work with businesses to improve the efficiency of processes such as tax filing, payments, and trade. For tax filings, IRAS collaborates with software developers and other government agencies to develop solutions to help businesses to meet their tax and other regulatory requirements. Businesses which adopt software listed on IRA's new Accounting Software Register Plus can now seamlessly submit their tax returns and transact with their business partners on the Invoice Now network. Since its launch in October 2021, about 30 software developers have onboarded or expressed interest to onboard the register. For payments, IRAS introduced PayNow for corporate income tax refunds last year so that businesses can enjoy fast, secure, and seamless e-refunds. Taxpayers would be updated by their banks when the refunds have been credited into their bank accounts. Today, all businesses that are due to receive CIT refunds from IRAS can choose between Gyro and PayNow to receive their refunds. For trade processors, Singapore Customs has digitalized bankers' guarantees for traders through the Networked Trade Platform, or NTP. Traders do not need to physically collect and submit paper guarantees, as participating banks can send e-guarantees data to customs securely through NTP. Close to 200 traders lodged e-guarantees with customs last year, saving 3 hours and $30 for each e-guarantee. Almost 90% of all guarantees issued by the 6 participating banks last year were e-guarantees. I'm heartened that Mr. Liang and Ms. Jessica Tan have asked about initiatives to enhance our business ecosystem to support environmental sustainability and inclusive growth. The government has been playing its part as a socially responsible and environmentally conscious buyer and encourages businesses to do the same. The government will require eligible suppliers to be accredited with the progressive wage mark from March 2023 to support of low-wage workers. Today, our suppliers for security, cleaning, lift maintenance, and landscaping are already required to pay progressive wages. Along with the expansion of the progressive wage model, the requirement for suppliers to attain the progressive wage mark will be extended to the retail, food services, and waste management sectors, and suppliers with in-house cleaners, security officers, landscape workers, administrators, and drivers. The Ministry of Manpower will share more on progressive wages in their COS. We have been incorporating sustainability requirements in our tenders. For example, all new government buildings and premises undergoing major renovation are required to meet stringent Green Mark standards under the greengov.sg initiative. We have also been buying green products, such as printing paper, that are accredited with the Singapore Green label. The latest demand aggregation tender for vehicle hiring services includes hybrid vehicles as part of the requirements and incorporates clauses to provide for electric vehicles when they become more prevalent in future. We will continue to expand the list of buys where green requirements are incorporated. We also consider the sustainability credentials of suppliers during the evaluation for government tenders. In construction, the BCA requires contractors to adopt environmental management practices before they can be registered to undertake building or civil engineering works. In addition, agencies like LTA and JTC have included environmental sustainability criteria in their construction tenders that gives extra points to suppliers that have adopted green practices or obtained green awards. The consideration of sustainability credentials will be extended to the procurement of more categories of goods and services and was recently piloted in tenders for public waste collection and accommodation and event venues. To enable the transition towards sustainability, the government has been supporting businesses in going green and welcomes businesses to make use of the support available. This includes schemes such as Enterprise Singapore's Enterprise Sustainability Program, the Economic Development Board's Resource Efficiency Grant for Energy, and the National Environment Agency's Energy Efficiency Fund. Under the Enterprise Sustainability Program, the government shares the risk with banks in lending to businesses to develop innovative green technologies and solutions, such as in clean energy and the circular economy. BCA has also introduced various Green Mark incentive schemes to encourage the adoption of environmentally friendly building technologies and building design practices. Let me turn now to Mr. Faisal Manap's cut. He asked if we could abolish GST on the water conservation tax. This is not a new suggestion. The Workers' Party had asked this before, and the government had explained it previously. The water conservation tax is how we've been able to make our water supply more resilient. With the threat of climate change, water resilience is more important than ever. The WCT reflects the fact that water is precious and encourages every individual and business to play a role in conserving our water resources. The water tariff and WCT together form the final price of water, reflecting the economic cost of producing water from our desalination and new water plants. GST is then levied on this final price, inclusive of taxes and duties that are related to the supply of goods or services. This approach is consistent with the practice in other jurisdictions, such as the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. At the future 9% GST, The amount of GST payable on the water conservation tax each month is around 90 cents for 3-room and 4-room HDB households on average, and less than 60 cents for 1-room and 2-room household. So I think, if I may understand Mr. Faisal Manap's concern, it's really for the low-income households and the fact that they would have to pay GST on the water conservation tax. So the first point I would make is that the amount is low, but more importantly, with the USAVE rebates and vouchers that have been given, these households will actually be able to cover their utilities bills. So they need not worry, and Mr. Manap should reassure his residents that with the USAVE rebates that are given from the government, they will be well taken care of by this government. And in fact, when you add the households, the USAVE rebates from the household support package together with the assurance package, it will come up to something like about 8 to 10 months worth of utilities bills, and this is not taking into account the permanent GST voucher scheme, which also has a USAVE component. So please, I would encourage Mr. Manap to visit the MOF website. The infographics are there showing, setting out the various archetypes. Please print them. And please distribute them freely to your residents, especially to the lower income households, and reassure them that this government will take care of them as far as that's concerned, and they need not be worried about the water conservation tax or the GST thereon. I think Ms. Hazel Pua had a couple of questions. She asked about essential goods, and I think her question was that if about the additional costs that would be incurred, and I think her question was premised on whether, if we believe that basic necessities should be exempt, what should be done about this. I just would like to point out to Ms. Pua that the underlying premise of her question was, if we believe that basic necessities should be exempt. And there is a philosophical difference between what PSP believes and what this government believes. The government does not believe that basic essentials should be exempt. What we do is we apply GST across the board for everybody, but we ensure that the lower income are buffered against this, and the middle income also receive a certain amount of benefit, so they get some buffer as well. And the Minister for Finance had earlier shown that for every dollar of tax paid, the lower income get back $4 to the dollar, and middle income get back $2 to the dollar. So I don't think that it would be very helpful to proceed to go into the details of a question, because it's premised on assuming the approach to basic necessities, and we have a fundamental difference there. The same, I think, would apply to her question on land sales. I think she had an elaborate example, but going into the details or discussing the minutiae or the technical details of that is not really going to take us much further. Fundamentally, our approach is this. Land is a national asset. Think of it as an endowment. In its physical form, it is an asset, it has a value. If you sell it, it gets converted into cash, but we put it back into the reserves. Some of it comes back in the form of the NIRC. Having, stretching it out, selling it and stretching it out over 10 years, 30 years, 99 years, fundamentally it's still a departure from the principle that we adhere to. So all I would say here is that it was comprehensively answered by the finance minister earlier, and I don't think it is necessary for me to, elaborate further on this. Mr. Leong Man Wai had a question on how do we account for large expenditures. Currently, let me just find that. In the budget book, the government's expenditure is classified by ministries and broken down into object classes based on the nature of the spending in the budget book. This is to allow the public to understand the major categories of government spending, such as expenditure on manpower, other operating expenditure, grants and transfers. So if he looks into the budget book, for example, he will find, just as an example, because he asked about COVID, at page 55, which is under Ministry of Social and Family Development, under operating expenditure, there will be a reference there to the extension of the COVID-19 recovery grant. That's a COVID-19 reference. If he looks at a different ministry, let's say Ministry of Finance, page 95, he will see that under the fifth paragraph, there's a reference there for COVID-19. So the point I'm making, or what I'm trying to illustrate to him, is that for accountability purposes, it is set out according to heads of expenditure, that is the various ministries. Within the various heads, if you're looking for a particular large expenditure like COVID-19, there will be a reference to COVID-19. That said, we are always open to seeing how things can be presented better or in a way that is more intuitive, and we will take that into account. I think he had some other questions on Singer, but that one was extensively debated, I think, earlier in the year. Some questions in relation to MAS, that would be publicly available as well. The thing is this, if Mr. Leong would like very specific figures or specific data, the better way to do that would be to file a PQ, and then we would have the appropriate time to look at the specific answer that he needs and to address his concern. I think I've covered most of the questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister. Clarifications? Mr. Leong Man Wai.
Deputy Speaker, thank you. I thank the Minister for the clarification on some of my questions, especially the one on the COVID-19. I think we'll refer to the budget again. But I think if the government can help us by singling out all the COVID-19 expenditure, that will help our understanding better. That's one clarification, if that can be done. Secondly is on the second question is, I have specifically asked for confirmation about the financial assets, $1.4 trillion. It is already a reported number, and also some other figures, $200 billion new reserves accumulated by MAS, all that. Can the Minister just confirm that? I don't think this needs to be another PQ. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if it's something that's already publicly available, then I don't need to confirm it. But if it is something that he wishes confirmation on, then I will have to check it, because if I were to give confirmation on anything, I would like to be sure that it's actually correct. So if he would just let me have that, he could drop me a note or he could file a PQ. We will see how best to address it. And on the other point about expenditures, we will look and see how we can present this in a manner that is useful. I say this because I do not want to leave the member with an impression that the Ministry of Finance will always be collating and organizing information at individual members' requests, because that is very difficult to do. But we do understand that public wants to understand how certain figures and expenditures are dealt with, and we will see how we can do that in a meaningful way.
Ms. Hazel Pua.
Okay, apart from the two questions that the Minister feels is not necessary to answer, I have a few other questions mentioned earlier, one of which is what would be the corporate tax rate increase that would be necessary to raise the same amount of revenue as a 2% hike in GST? And also, what what's the expected rate of GST in 2030? And finally, can I seek confirmation whether or not land will be repeatedly sold to HDB at prevailing land prices? And also, does the same apply to industrial land with respect to JTC? Thank you.
Sorry, the last question was whether land will be repeatedly sold to whom?
HDB.
Okay.
And also
you
JTC.
mean land for HDB development?
Yes. So at the end of the lease, when it returns to government, would it again, repeat?
Right. Well, that would happen once every 99 years. So we haven't quite reached that stage yet. So it might be a little premature to address that question. The expected rate of GST in 2030, well, we really don't know at this point of time. Right now, we have just gone through one exercise of raising the GST by 2 percentage points in 2023 and 2024. And obviously, we will try to make that last as long as we possibly can with the revenues that we have. And I think the last question was, what would be the tax rate increase? I don't have that figure with me at the moment. Perhaps if the member just files a PQ on that, I'll get back to her.
Yes, Mr. Leong.
Chairman, thanks. I'd like to confirm with the Minister again. Since the $1.4 trillion financial assets is reported in the government financial statements, so the Minister will know it. Okay, and I'm asking her to confirm that number. Is it a number that cannot be confirmed, or I don't know what is the reason why it cannot be spoken in Parliament?
Mr. Chairman, I thank Mr. Leong's faith in my abilities, but I don't usually carry all the figures of all, published government data in my head. So if Mr. Leong is saying that there is a figure which is out there and it is published, and it's published by a government agency, then I'll have to assume that it's correct. It's just that if I don't have the figure with me at the moment, and if it's MAS, because you must remember that I'm with MOF, I would like to check before I give any confirmations. If he has an issue with the figure, he should let us know what the problem is as well. So in short, whatever he's asking about a figure, if it's published and it's a published figure from the government, he can take that is the figure.
Mr. Leong, would you like to withdraw your amendment?
Chairman, I still have a question.
We need to progress.
No, Chairman, if there's a question, I have to ask the question.
There is a time limit.
So if there's a time limit, we cannot ask any more questions, even though those are relevant questions?
There's guillotine time limits.
Okay, thanks, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, allow me to firstly congratulate the Finance Minister for his maiden budget, which is very well structured, bold and far-reaching, and also to thank Second Minister for Finance and for answering our questions, as well as the MOF team for the tremendous work. So we have seen multiple budgets in the last two FYs due to the crisis situations. I hope that FY 2022 and 2023 will be a one budget FY, which will mean that we are back to a normalized or stable environment. Nevertheless, I'm sure members of this House would be ready to consider any additional fiscal measures should the situation deteriorate and that the needs arises to support Singaporean families, households, and businesses as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I beg leave to withdraw my amendment.
Is the honourable member given leave to withdraw the amendment? I think leave of the majority is given. The amendment is withdrawn. The question is that the sum of 974,778,000 $1,400 for head M stand part of the mean estimates. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the sum of $141,671,700 for head M stand part of the development estimates. As many of their opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.